When we talk about narratives in games, there's a few different ways that they can be implemented. Now, video games is a different thing. Narratives is pretty much ubiquitous when it comes to video games in some fashion or another. In board games, there's a few different ways that they've gone about doing narratives. So one of the big ones is a storytelling game. This would be like your Dungeons and Dragons, D&D, your your tabletop role-playing game, where you're literally creating a story. You're telling stories to your friends. You're creating it. That would probably be the top layer of like the most heavy-driven story, because it's totally story-driven. A step down from that would be maybe a legacy game in board games, and if you don't know about that, you can check out the video that I made, What is a Legacy Game, that talks about more about what that entails. Essentially, it's just like every game that you play is a new chapter in a story, so you're going through that, but you can make decisions along the way that change the story, changes the story. The last one that I talked about in that video is called campaign games, or these are kind of like sandbox games. Now, these are games that don't necessarily change the story. I think you're still going to kind of get where you're going to get, but there's certain ways in which they implement little things along the way. And there's a few different campaign games that I really enjoy. Two of them come to mind. I picked one because I want to talk about it in this video. So what I'm going to do is a couple of bullet points. I'm going to start off by telling a story, and then I'm going to talk about the game, and then the last bullet point is I'm going to talk about how the narrative works within this campaign game. So let's get into it. Let's start with the story. This game came out a few years ago, and it got lots of praise. Lots of people were playing it. They were saying it was really great. Through some friends of mine, I was able to sit in on a game and play it. Full disclosure, I hated it. Not only did I dislike the game, but I verbally, with my mouth, went around telling everyone, that game stinks. I do not like it. It's an area control, area influence game that is an engine building game, and it was just like, it's too slow. Every time on my turn, I get to take a resource. Done. Or maybe next time around, I'll get to draw a card. Done. And it just was so slow. I hated it. And I told the people that owned it I hated it, that I didn't want to play it anymore. I did get suckered into playing it again, because, it's one of those things, kind of like a movie, where you're like, yeah, I'll give it another shot. I did play it a second time with a few more player counts. Still did like it. Way too slow. Nothing can build up. I can't seem to get anything done on my turn fast enough. So some time went by, and the company released an expansion for the game that was a campaign expansion. So it was a narrative aspect. Well, knowing me and this channel, I was like, I'm gonna have to check this out. I'm really interested on it. And so I ended up getting a copy of the game. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, well, why would you waste money on a game that you've spent the better part of a year talking trash about, so to speak? Well, it's for two reasons. One, I've already explained the fact that it's a campaign game. I gotta figure out what they're doing. I want to know what this story is. I want to know how they're implementing the story in this campaign. And two, the artwork and the setting are amazing. The artwork is phenomenal. I believe it won some awards when it came out. I've always loved the artwork, even when I didn't like the game. So I picked up a copy of the base game just to play it before the expansion came out, and I fell in love with it. I don't know what it was, or what it is, but something. I went out on Amazon, I bought everything for this game. I bought the big box for it, the big board, the upgraded components, the extra promo cards. I got everything. I have a huge box of like $300 worth of stuff. I love this game. I don't know why. Just love it now. So, I want to talk about this game. For those of you that haven't guessed it already, it's by Stonemaier Games, which does amazing work. I've enjoyed all of their games that I've played anyways so far. They've all been really great. And so we'll get into where I'll talk about the actual game. Now, this is not the big box that I have. It's too heavy. I'm not going to hold it up. But here is the box of the base game, and the game is called Scythe. And here's what it looks like, just if you buy the base game. And so it's a kind of like dudes on a map. You got like a map, and you know, moving your people around, controlling areas, trying to get resources to build more of your infrastructure and things like that. So started to play Scythe, started to really enjoy it, waited for the expansion to come out, finally came out, got a friend together, we played through the whole campaign. And it is called, it was Scythe, but it's called The Rise of Fenris, which is just a cool cover right there, just when you look at it. The setting takes place in a an alternate history post-World War I in Europe, Russia kind of area, Eastern Europe or whatever. And so the expansion needs the base game to play. You need to buy the base game to play it. But it basically comes with a book, which I'm going to show you here, that is your story. So it's a pretty cool book. Like I said, Stonemaier has all really great components, and here is your story. And it tells you about the world, the backstory. It's got some cool artwork to it and pictures, and every chapter, episode, whatever, is a new game. And what it does is it tells you how to set up the game, what the objectives are, because there's multiple ways to win the game. If I forgot to mention, Scythe, by the way, is what we would call a heavy game. Basically means it's got a lot of complexity to it. It's a long game to play. It's a hard game to learn, but it's very rewarding if you can get past all the rules and get into it. And if you play it enough, it just works out. And you just figure it out and come up with some strategies and how to win. The cool thing is about how to win is there's like a list of like 15 objectives. You only need to do like 6 of them to win the game. So you can just kind of cherry pick which 6 you want to focus on, while your partners, or not partners, the other players, they're trying to do their own little 6, and whoever can get their 6 done first wins the game. And how the story works is they'll give you some story that you read, then you will set up the game based on that story. So that's again, it's linking story with mechanics, with board game state, and you'll start playing. And it's got a kind of a sandbox feel where there's certain things that are triggered at certain times, just depending. So I'm not going to spoil anything, but I will give an example. This is not in the game. But, for example, there's an ice castle in this world. You can go visit the ice castle. It takes a bit to get there, but you can visit it. When you visit the ice castle, you go inside and, hey, son of a gun, there's an ice queen. And when you get there, you open a box, and it's like, there's a little figure of the ice queen and some cards of how the ice queen works and how she does her thing. So narratively, it makes sense because you might come across the Ice Queen in Game 3. It might be in Game 7. So it's sandbox-ish in that way. And then it adds in what we call in the board game industry, whatever, modules. Now, modules basically means just adding in new ways to play the game, new ways to score objectives, new gameplay things, as far as like, I couldn't do this on my turn 2 games ago, but now that the Ice Queen is in play, I can do this action, which wasn't available before, which totally changes the gameplay because now I'm worried about doing a different action. That's completely fictional, Ice Queen. That's not in the game. But that's an example of how this story works. You go through this story and it triggers certain things at certain times. And when they do trigger, it all makes sense in the story. So I was talking about an Ice Queen. Well, I didn't give her any background or any story. But if I did, which the game does, it would work a certain way, and it would be like, oh, that makes sense. Now our objectives change. Or now the world has changed in such a way that we set up our board completely different. Why? Because it makes sense narratively speaking. And so it's a real big marriage, and this is something that other games have done as well. I'm not saying that Scythe is the only game that's like this, or it's completely unique and special. It's just the one that I picked. But the story and the mechanisms, meaning the way that the game is played, or the rule set, the schema of rules, connect, and they make thematic sense. So they make thematic ties between the narrative and how you're playing the game. So if the Ice Queen is really pissed off, she will come and raid your camp. And so that's something you need to worry about, where you didn't have to worry about before. And so it completely changes your story. And this does have some branching narratives a little bit, but like I said at the beginning of the video, it's sandbox-ish, but you're still going to get to where you're going to get at the end of the end of the game. The story's going to get to where the story is going to get. Now, whether if you unlock things or do things or what objectives get changed or messed with, it's all going to be just depending upon your games that you play, which is cool. But from a narratological aspect, it's interesting because you're not necessarily interacting directly per se as a legacy game, although this does have some legacy elements to it. You are kind of picking and choosing when these inciting incidences happen in the narrative. And when they do happen, they add modules. So game setups are constantly being changed because it's like, we didn't have this last time. There's an infrastructure thing as far as your buildings and how you build them and what kind of powers they do. Not even in the first game. That changes. Now, if I just said on game 3, you do this, that's one way to put it together. But if I say on game 3, you're going to do this with your buildings and give it a story, give it a reason why your buildings are like this or why your troops are now moving like this, it adds more of that thematic tie to the game, which changes, as narratology says, the way that the story is told changes the perspective of the user or the interactive member, which would be the player, you yourself. So if it's basically the thing that I've used in my thesis paper of you land on a spot, you draw a card, it says go back 3 spaces. Well, son of a gun, you go back 3 spaces. Why? Because the rules told you to flip a card and the card says go back 3 spaces. But what these games are doing, this one and other ones, is they're saying flip a card, go back 3 spaces, but here's why. And they tell you this whole thing about your character, your faction, and it all makes sense. Oh, I'm going back 3 spaces, or this is what's happening to the board because of the story. The story is impacting the board. And from a very basic game design and a narratological design, that's what really connects with people. People connect more when they get to name their factions, when they get to upgrade their factions, when they get to customize their factions, when they get the autonomy to do whatever they want with their faction and win however they want. People will be tied to a story. And I definitely was tied to this story. And there are some things where things happen, and I thought it was really cool. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but there's a certain historical figure that shows up in the game, and I'm a fan, so I was like, yeah, that's really cool. That's awesome. And some new factions come out and some goodies and surprises like that. But essentially, it's just saying, here's a really complex game, but we're going to start it off on minimalizing it, and then we're going to keep adding modules as we go. But we're going to give a story why those modules make sense. And that's what Scythe does really well, or the Rise of Fenris, the expansion for Scythe. So from a narratological aspect, it does a really great job of marrying the gameplay, the mechanics, the gameplay with the story, and making them kind of feel like That makes sense. You don't just go back 3 spaces because the card told you. You go back 3 spaces because this, that, and the other thing. There's a reason behind everything. So closing out this video, this is not the only game that does this. This is just the one that I wanted to talk about. Another one that I'll throw out briefly, and I know once I get this video all done, I'm going to go back and go, I forgot this one and this one. But off the top of my mind, some Ryan Lockett games also do the same, Above and Below, most notably Near and Far, which is another one I can talk about. But that, again, is the same kind of a book where you go through different worlds and you're kind of creating a story and interacting with people. These aren't necessarily legacy games, but they have that element to it, and they have definitely, especially Near and Far, has a big sandbox feel to it. You can go here, you can go here, you're going to miss things, and you're going to discover this earlier than other people, you're going to discover this part later than other people, and so these are the idea of campaign games. And so this is one that I really enjoy, that I wanted to use as a reference. So it's Scythe, The Rise of Fenris. A perfect marriage of good writing, prose, the narrative, marrying the mechanics. So I'll catch you all at the next video. As always, thanks for watching. See you later.